My stepdaughter reported me for abuse to hide the fact that she stole her mother's jewelry, but the security cameras exposed her in front of the police. My wife and I have been married for 6 years. I'm not going to pretend that everything has been perfect because no marriage is, but I always thought we had built something solid. She is everything I looked for in a partner. A strong, affectionate woman with a kindness I had rarely seen in anyone. However, when you marry someone who has children from a previous relationship, as is the case with Sophia, family dynamics always bring complications. I have never had children of my own, so I took on this role with great caution, trying to be supportive but without crossing boundaries that were not mine. Although I did everything possible to get along with her daughter, Valeria, there was always a barrier I couldn't cross. Valeria was 12 years old when I met Sophia. She was a quiet girl, but not particularly problematic. At first, I thought our relationship could improve over time, that we would eventually build something resembling a friendship, but that never happened. She tolerated me at best, and at worst ignored me completely. She never directly disrespected me, but her attitude made it clear that I was an intruder in her life, someone who had come to interrupt the small world she had with her mother. When Valeria turned 18, things didn't improve, they got worse. She was at that stage in life where you try to find your independence, but often do so in impulsive and frankly unwise ways. Although she lives primarily with her biological father, she started spending more time at our house whenever she needed something from Sophia. I'm not going to lie, this made me somewhat uncomfortable, but I never wanted to interfere in the relationship between mother and daughter. After all, Sophia always said that everything she did was for Valeria's well-being, and I didn't want to be the one to put obstacles in that bond. It all started a few weeks ago. Sophia and I were organizing our things in the new house we had recently moved into when we noticed that some of her grandmother's jewelry was disappearing. These were not just any pieces, they were objects of enormous sentimental value to my wife, memories of her childhood and special moments with her family. Among the missing items were a diamond necklace and a gold bracelet. At first, we thought we had simply misplaced them during the move. The boxes were still disorganized, and it seemed logical to assume they were hidden among them. A few days passed, and no matter how much we searched every corner of the house, the jewelry was still missing. Something began to worry me. I'm not one of those people who obsesses over small details, but something didn't add up. One day, while I was putting some things away in the bedroom, I noticed that one of the dresser drawers was slightly disarranged. It wasn't very obvious, but I knew that neither Sophia nor I had checked that drawer since we arrived at the house. It was the place where she kept the jewelry that was now missing. The idea that someone else had touched our things began to haunt me. Around that time, Valeria had started visiting us more frequently. She would come some afternoons while Sophia and I were working and say she was stopping by to study quietly, or to pick up things she had left there. I didn't want to say anything at first. I had no proof that anything strange was happening, and I didn't want to sow discord in our family. But I started connecting the dots. The frequency of the visits, the missing jewelry, the out-of-place drawer. Everything pointed to something I didn't want to admit. After mulling it over for several days, I decided to take a preventative measure. I installed security cameras inside the house, mainly in the living room area and the master bedroom. I didn't tell Sophia because I didn't want to alarm her or cause an unnecessary fight. In my mind, this was a way to rule out any suspicion and protect ourselves in case something strange was really going on. The cameras were discreet, and my intention wasn't to specifically monitor Valeria, but to make sure our house was safe. What I discovered in the recordings was devastating. There was Valeria entering our room while we weren't there. I saw her checking drawers, opening the dresser where we kept the jewelry, and to my horror, taking the diamond necklace and the gold bracelet that meant so much to Sophia. She looked completely calm, as if she had done it 1,000 times before. My emotions overflowed. Anger, disappointment, and above all, a deep sadness. How could someone do something like that, let alone to their own mother? I took a couple of days to decide how to handle the situation. I'm not an impulsive person, and I knew that confronting her without proof could backfire. So when I finally spoke to Valeria, I did so calmly but directly. I told her that I knew she had taken the jewelry, and that she needed to return it. What I didn't expect was her reaction. Instead of admitting what she had done, Valeria started yelling at me. She called me a liar. She accused me of trying to ruin her relationship with her mother, and even said that I had always hated her. It was a scene that left me speechless. The worst part was not her reaction but how Sophia handled the situation. When I told her what had happened, she didn't know what to say. Although she didn't directly accuse me, she didn't defend me either. She seemed paralyzed, trapped between her daughter and me. I felt as if all the times I had tried to be a good husband and stepfather meant nothing. That night I stayed awake on the sofa, wondering if I had made the right decision by marrying someone who couldn't trust me in crucial moments. I thought that would be the lowest point of this whole situation, but I had no idea what was yet to come. Update 1. A few days have passed since I confronted Valeria about the jewelry. The atmosphere in the house has become tense, as if we were all walking on eggshells. Sophia has been distant, and although she doesn't say it directly, I know she's struggling with what I told her. I think part of her wants to believe me, but at the same time it's difficult for a mother to accept that her daughter could have done something so dishonest. I've tried to stay calm, giving her space to process, but the truth is I feel like a stranger in my own home. There's nothing worse than feeling guilty for something you didn't do, just because the people around you doubt you. On the other hand, Valeria seems completely calm, as if nothing had happened. Her attitude irritates me deeply, but I restrain myself. I try to avoid her because any interaction with her now seems like a time bomb about to explode. However, what I didn't know was that she was already plotting something much bigger and much more damaging. One afternoon, while working from home, I heard someone knocking loudly on the door. I wasn't expecting visitors, so I went to open it only to find myself with 2 police officers on the doorstep. One of them explained to me, in a professional but firm tone, that they were there to talk to me about a complaint of abuse filed against me. For a moment I didn't understand. Abuse? Me? My brain took time to process what I was hearing. But then I understood. Valeria had reported me. According to the officers, Valeria had reported that I was an abusive, controlling, and emotionally violent stepfather. She claimed that I constantly harassed her, that I didn't let her feel safe in her own home, and that I had recently pushed her down the stairs during an argument. When I heard that last part, I felt as if the ground had opened up beneath my feet. It was such a blatant lie that for a second I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The most ironic thing is that we hadn't had any direct interaction since the day I confronted her about the jewelry. I tried to stay calm while explaining to the officers that these accusations were completely false. I told them about the jewelry situation and how I had confronted Valeria, but they made it clear that they were there to investigate the complaints, not to take sides. At that moment I realized how vulnerable I was. Even though I knew I had proof, the mere idea that someone could fabricate such an elaborate story to destroy my reputation was terrifying. When Sophia arrived home that afternoon, the tension exploded. I told her what had happened, and for a moment I thought she would react with indignation, that she would take my side and call Valeria to demand an explanation. But to my surprise, her reaction was completely different. She remained silent, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she simply said, "I need to talk to Valeria before drawing any conclusions." That was the moment I knew that something in our relationship had broken. Later that night, Sophia confronted Valeria, but I wasn't present at that conversation. I learned the details later, when Sophia told me with tears in her eyes. Valeria maintained her story, saying that I had always been cruel to her, that I constantly watched her, and that I made her feel like she didn't belong in this family. She also added that I pushed her when she tried to defend herself during an argument, which supposedly justified the complaint. Sophia looked at me and said, "I don't know what to think. She's my daughter, but you're my husband. I'm trapped between the two of you." That phrase remained etched in my mind like a sentence. That night I couldn't sleep. I was furious not only with Valeria but also with Sophia. How could she even doubt me after everything we had been through together? But at the same time, I knew this was all Valeria's doing, who clearly knew how to manipulate her mother into feeling guilty and confused. It was as if she had thrown a bomb into our family, and was now enjoying watching us deal with the consequences. The next day, I received a call from the officers who had come to my house. They wanted to make a visit to inspect the house and confirm whether there was any indication that Valeria's allegations were true. Although I knew they wouldn't find anything, the idea of a formal investigation made me nervous. It wasn't just a matter of pride, it was the fact that my integrity was being questioned in such a public and humiliating way. I decided it was time to use the evidence I had. I had been saving the security camera recordings as a last resort, because I didn't want Sophia to feel like I was forcing her to choose between her daughter and me. But now the situation had gone too far. Before the officers arrived, I showed Sophia the recordings. At first, she seemed reluctant to watch them, as if afraid of what she might see. But once she started seeing Valeria entering our bedroom, checking the drawers and taking the jewelry, she couldn't hold back her tears. "I can't believe my daughter did this," she said in a low voice. But even then it wasn't the relief I expected. Instead of being outraged with Valeria, Sophia seemed devastated, as if the evidence were a direct attack on her motherhood. The day the officers came to the house, I brought the recordings as backup. I wanted to make sure my version of events was clear, but I didn't expect things to unfold as they did. Update 2. When the officers arrived at our house to continue the investigation, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but the idea of having to justify my innocence to strangers in my own home was humiliating. Sophia was visibly uncomfortable, and although she didn't say it out loud, it was clear she was struggling with her own feelings. Meanwhile, Valeria wasn't present, which was a relief for me. I don't think I could have maintained my composure if she were there, pretending to be the victim. The officers began asking questions about the layout of the house, specifically about the stairs, as that was the supposed scene of the crime where, according to Valeria, I had pushed her. They asked me to describe what had happened that day. But obviously there was nothing to tell because her entire story was fabricated. While I spoke, I could sense the doubt in the atmosphere. No matter how professional the police are, there's always a part of them that wonders, what if it's true? That's when I decided it was time to show them the evidence. Before things could go any further, I explained that I had security cameras installed in the house, and that the recordings could shed light on the accusations. I clearly remember the moment I said this because the atmosphere in the room completely changed. One of the officers raised an eyebrow, as if unsure whether to believe me, while the other simply said, "Can we see them right now?" I connected my laptop to the living room TV so everyone could see the recordings. Sophia was sitting on the sofa, pale and with her hands clasped in her lap. When the first recording started playing, I could feel my own heart pounding. The screen clearly showed Valeria entering the house on one of her recent visits. So far, everything seemed normal. But then the recording showed her going directly to the master bedroom, opening drawers and rummaging through our things. The key moment arrived when she took the diamond necklace and the gold bracelet, quickly storing them in her bag before leaving the room. The officers looked at each other, and one of them let out an audible sigh. "Well, that changes things," one of them said while taking notes. There was no way Valeria could justify what we had just seen. And best of all, I also had recordings showing the day she claimed I pushed her down the stairs. In those images, Valeria was clearly seen going up and down the stairs on her own, and even at one point pretending to trip and look back as if she were rehearsing. When those images ended, I turned to Sophia. I didn't say anything because I felt there was nothing to say. She was crying silently, her gaze fixed on the screen. For a moment, I thought I would finally see the indignation I had expected from her. But all she said was, "I can't believe my daughter did this." Her tone was not one of anger, but of devastation, as if she had lost something inside herself. The officers apologized for the inconvenience of the investigation, but explained that they needed to take this evidence to the station to include it in the case. They also informed me that Valeria would be contacted to answer for the theft, as well as for the false accusations she had made against me. Although this should have given me some relief, it didn't entirely. Yes, the evidence was on my side, but the emotional damage had already been done. What hurt me most was not what Valeria had tried to do, but Sophia's reaction throughout this process. Her inability to take my side from the beginning continued to weigh on me. That night, when the officers left, Sophia and I had a long and painful conversation. She apologized through tears, saying that she didn't know how to handle the situation, and that she was overwhelmed by what she had discovered. She explained that she felt like a horrible mother, unable to accept that her daughter could do something so vile. Although I understood where she was coming from, I couldn't help but feel hurt. I told her, as calmly as I could muster, that her lack of support during these weeks had made me feel betrayed. Sophia didn't try to justify her actions. She simply accepted what I said and apologized again. Of course, the drama didn't end there. The next day, Valeria was called to the police station for questioning. According to what they told me later, she tried to maintain her initial version, saying that I was an abusive stepfather and that I was only using the cameras to manipulate the narrative. However, when they showed her the recordings, her facade began to crumble. Eventually, she admitted to taking the jewelry, but didn't offer any apologies or show remorse. Instead, she tried to justify her behavior by saying that she needed money and that it wasn't a big deal. That response infuriated me more than I can describe. Not only had she stolen something valuable, but she didn't even seem to understand the impact of her actions. Meanwhile, Sophia was completely devastated. She didn't know how to handle what was happening, and to be honest, neither did I. At that moment, I understood that things between us would never be the same. Although the evidence had exonerated me, the damage to our relationship seemed irreparable. Update 3. After the evidence came to light and Valeria was confronted by the police, I thought the worst was over. But what I didn't know was that the real consequences of this situation were just beginning. Although it felt like a relief that the truth was finally out in the open, it was also evident that the emotional and legal impact of all this would continue to linger like a dark cloud for a long time. Valeria, when faced with the irrefutable evidence, had no choice but to admit to stealing the jewelry. However, her confession was cold, without a trace of remorse. According to what the officers told me, she justified her actions by saying that she needed money and that her mother had plenty. That attitude left me speechless. Not only was she evading all responsibility, but she was also trying to minimize the damage she had caused, as if stealing something so valuable from her own mother were an insignificant detail. When the police explained to Sophia and me the possible legal consequences, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I felt that Valeria needed to face some form of punishment to understand the gravity of her actions. Not only had she stolen, but she had tried to destroy my reputation and our family with her lies. On the other hand, I knew that any legal action would only further complicate things between Sophia and me. Despite everything, Sophia was still Valeria's mother, and every step I took in this matter would be another step toward an emotional separation that seemed inevitable. Finally, the officers recommended filing charges for theft and defamation, considering that the stolen jewelry had significant value, and that the false accusations against me had required an official investigation. Although I hesitated, I decided to go ahead. I didn't do it out of revenge, but because I felt I had to protect myself and make it clear that I wouldn't allow anyone, not even my wife's daughter, to trample on my name and my integrity. Sophia didn't directly oppose, but I could see in her eyes that this was destroying her. It felt as if every step I took in my own defense built a higher wall between us. The legal process moved quickly due to the conclusive evidence. Valeria reached an agreement to avoid a full trial, agreeing to perform community service and return the jewelry she still had in her possession. But this outcome wasn't enough to close the open wounds in our family. Although justice was on the side of truth, the emotional damage was irreparable. Meanwhile, the relationship between Sophia and Valeria also began to fracture. Valeria went to live with her biological father, which initially seemed like a logical solution to calm the waters. However, instead of accepting responsibility for her actions, Valeria began using the situation to play the victim in front of her mother and her social circle. She told everyone that I was a manipulator, and that I had used the cameras to spy on and control her. She even tried to convince her mother that everything she had done was a reaction to how I supposedly made her feel in our home. What hurt me most was not hearing these lies but seeing how Sophia struggled to justify her daughter's behavior. On more than one occasion I heard her say things like, "She's young, she doesn't know what she's doing," or "She's confused, she's not a bad person." Although I understood that Sophia was trying to protect herself emotionally, I felt that attitude was an insult to me and everything that had happened. It was as if she was more concerned with smoothing over Valeria's actions than with repairing the damage she had done to me. Our relationship, which was already in crisis, began to crumble even further. Conversations became tense and charged with emotion. Every time I tried to talk about how I felt, Sophia became defensive, saying that she was doing the best she could in an impossible situation. There were times when I thought we could overcome it, but every time Valeria reappeared in the conversation, the resentment returned like a wave I couldn't stop. One night, while we were eating dinner in silence, Sophia finally broke the ice. She told me that she had spoken with Valeria, and that her daughter had agreed to return the remaining jewelry. However, she also told me that Valeria continued to insist that I was the real problem. She says she doesn't feel safe with you, Sophia confessed to me in a trembling voice. It was as if someone had stabbed me in the chest. She didn't feel safe with me? After everything I had done to protect this family, it was absurd. But the worst part was that Sophia seemed to consider that possibility, even if only for a second. That conversation was a breaking point for me. I realized that even though there was proof of my innocence, Sophia would always have doubts in the back of her mind. No matter how much evidence I had or how much I tried to demonstrate my loyalty, the bond between mother and daughter would always be stronger than any truth I could present. I felt completely alone, as if I were fighting a battle I had already lost. In the following days, I tried to keep busy and avoid thinking too much about the situation, but it was impossible. Every corner of the house reminded me of what I had lost: the trust of my wife, the peace in my home, and in a way, my dignity. Although I knew Valeria was receiving punishment for what she had done, I couldn't help but feel that she had won in a certain sense. She had sown doubt and chaos, and although the truth had come out, the damage was already done. That week, while reviewing some documents in my office, I found an old photo of Sophia and me on our first vacation together. We were smiling, carefree, completely in love. For a moment, I wanted to hold on to that image, to that version of us that seemed so distant now. But something inside me knew that that couple no longer existed. What Valeria had done not only affected our relationship, it also made me question whether Sophia and I were truly compatible. Doubts began to grow in my mind. I had ignored warning signs from the beginning. I had idealized Sophia to the point of not seeing that she would always be trapped between her daughter and me. Although I still loved her, I couldn't help but feel that something fundamental between us had broken, and I wasn't sure if it could be repaired. Update 4. The days following the legal resolution of the case with Valeria have been strange. On the one hand, the weight of the police investigation and the false accusations has finally been lifted from my shoulders. On the other hand, the emotional void that remained after this whole experience seems impossible to fill. Although justice is on my side, I can't help but feel as if I have lost something much more important: my peace of mind, respect, and trust in my marriage. Valeria is now living with her biological father, which has reduced the immediate tension in our home. However, her presence still weighs on us like a ghost that refuses to disappear. Since she moved, she has been in constant contact with Sophia, sending her messages and calling almost daily. According to Sophia, most of those messages are Valeria's attempts to justify her behavior, or worse, to insist that I was to blame for this whole situation. Despite the evidence and the legal consequences, Valeria seems incapable of taking responsibility for her actions. Her narrative of victimization not only continues to live, but it has strengthened. The most frustrating part is that Sophia, although she doesn't say it directly, seems to keep leaving a small door open to her daughter's words. Every time we talk about the subject, she says things like, "Valeria is very hurt. She doesn't know how to handle all this." Or "It's difficult for her to accept what she did, but she needs time." Those phrases, although understandable from a mother's point of view, feel like a bucket of cold water for me. What about what I need? What about the time I've lost trying to prove my innocence while Valeria played with our lives, as if they were pieces on a chessboard? 3 days ago, the tension finally reached its peak. It all started with something seemingly trivial: a message from Valeria that Sophia left open on her phone while she was making breakfast. I'm not someone who checks my partner's devices, but when I saw it, I couldn't help but read it. It was a long message full of reproaches towards her mother, but what really infuriated me was one line in particular. "I don't understand how you can stay with that man after everything he's done to you and me. He is the real problem and he always will be." That phrase stayed etched in my mind for hours. It wasn't just an accusation against me, it was Valeria's attempt to undermine what little remained of our marriage. I felt a mixture of rage and helplessness, but I decided not to say anything at the time. I kept my thoughts to myself until the evening, when I finally confronted Sophia. I asked her directly if she still believed what Valeria was saying, if in some corner of her mind she still doubted me. Her answer was like a punch in the stomach. "It's not that I doubt you," she said, avoiding my gaze. "It's that she's my daughter. I can't simply turn off my feelings for her, no matter how much she has disappointed me." That confession, although honest, confirmed what I had feared from the beginning. Sophia could never completely detach herself from Valeria's words and actions. There would always be a space in her heart that would justify, excuse, or at least try to understand what her daughter did, even if it meant questioning me. For the first time in 6 years of marriage, I realized that we weren't a team. Deep down, Sophia would always be alone in her struggle to balance her role as mother and wife, and I would always be in the background. The conversation became more intense. I told her what I had been keeping inside for weeks, that I felt betrayed, not only by Valeria but also by her. That I couldn't understand how someone who claimed to love me had allowed doubts to poison our relationship. Sophia started to cry, saying that she was doing the best she could, that she never wanted to hurt me, and that she also didn't know how to handle the situation. "It's easy for you to say that I should push my daughter aside, but you don't know what that means to me," she said between sobs. Her response infuriated me even more. I never asked her to stop being a mother, but I did expect her to support me when the evidence was clear, when the truth was right in front of us. That night was the first time I said out loud what I had been thinking for weeks. "I don't know if we can go on like this. I don't know if we still have anything to save." After that, there was a deathly silence in the house. Sophia locked herself in our room, and I slept on the sofa, staring at the ceiling for hours and wondering how we had reached this point. In 6 years of marriage, I had never felt such a great distance between us. The idea of separating had always seemed impossible, but now it felt like the only logical way out. We were no longer the couple we used to be, and what had happened with Valeria wasn't just an isolated problem, it was a symptom of something much deeper. In the following days, Sophia and I barely spoke. She continued trying to maintain constant contact with Valeria, while I tried to avoid any interaction that reminded me of everything that happened. I'm starting to pack some things in secret, not because I want to leave immediately, but because I need to feel that I have control over something in my life. The truth is, I don't know if I'm willing to keep fighting for a relationship where I'll always be competing against a shadow. I feel like my decision is almost made, but I don't know how to face the final conversation. There's too much history between us, too many good memories mixed with the bad. But one thing is clear. I no longer trust that this marriage can survive. Final update. A few days ago I started packing my things, convinced that my marriage was irreparably broken. I had come to the conclusion that I couldn't continue in a relationship where I would always be in second place, where the shadow of Valeria and Sophia's doubts would continue to torment me. However, what I didn't know was that there was still one piece of the puzzle to be discovered, one that would change everything I thought I knew about this situation. While reviewing some of my belongings in the guest room, I found a box I didn't recognize. It was among my things, but it clearly didn't belong to me. I opened it, thinking it would be something like a storage box forgotten during the move, but what I found left me frozen. Inside, there were a series of documents, notes, and a receipt from a pawn shop. The receipt was recent, from a few weeks ago, and detailed the sale of a diamond necklace and a gold bracelet, the same pieces that had been stolen. My first reaction was to assume that Valeria had hidden that box there at some point. She had returned to the house without my realizing it, or perhaps Sophia had left it there accidentally. But something didn't add up. I reviewed the documents more carefully and found something that made my heart stop. The receipt was in Sophia's name, not Valeria's. For a moment I thought it was a mistake, that maybe someone had used her name. But the more I read the papers, the clearer it became that Sophia not only knew about the theft, but she herself had taken the jewelry to be pawned. There were detailed transactions showing how Sophia had received money for the pieces and deposited it into a bank account unknown to me. My mind raced in all directions. Why would she do something like that? And why blame Valeria? I felt as if my whole world were falling apart again, but this time in a completely different direction. I decided not to confront Sophia immediately. I needed more proof. So I took pictures of all the documents and spent the afternoon trying to put the pieces together. I reviewed our joint bank statements, looking for any unusual patterns, but everything seemed normal. Then I decided to do something I never thought I would do. I accessed her email. I know it was an invasion of privacy, but at that point there was no room for trust. What I found there was even worse. Among her emails were recent messages with a man whose name I didn't recognize. At first they were vague conversations, but then I found something much more explicit. Sophia had transferred money to him several times in recent months, with descriptions ranging from urgent help to new beginning. In one of the emails, he thanked her for her sacrifice and told her that they could soon be together, far from all the complications. My stomach churned as I read that. Not only had she sold the jewelry to help this man, but she had planned to use Valeria as a scapegoat to cover her tracks. That night, while Sophia was sleeping, I reviewed the security camera recordings once more. I looked for something I might have missed, and sure enough, there it was. In one of the recordings, days before confronting Valeria, Sophia was seen entering the bedroom and checking the same drawers where the jewelry was kept. I had thought the cameras had only caught Valeria, but Sophia had been there too, taking the pieces. The most devastating thing was that another recording clearly showed Sophia handing a small box to a man on our front porch, the same man with whom she had been exchanging emails. The truth hit with overwhelming force. Sophia hadn't just betrayed our relationship, she had used her own daughter as a shield to cover up her actions. All the chaos, all the lies, all the damage caused to our family weren't the product of a rebellious and manipulative daughter, but of a wife who was willing to destroy everything to follow her own plans. The next morning I confronted Sophia. I placed the documents, the photos, and the recordings on the living room table and waited for her to come down. When she did, her expression went from bewilderment to panic in a matter of seconds. I didn't give her time for explanations. I simply said, "I want you to talk now without lies." Sophia tried to deny everything at first, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Finally, through tears, she confessed. She had met this man, an old friend from her youth, months before all this began. According to her, he was in a difficult situation and had asked her for help. At first, she only gave him money from her savings, but when that wasn't enough, she decided to sell the jewelry, knowing that she could blame Valeria if the situation got out of control. And the false accusations? Why did you let Valeria do that? I asked, trying to stay calm while my whole body trembled with rage. Her answer left me even more stunned. I thought that if Valeria put you in the spotlight, it would be easier for me to handle things. I didn't want you to suspect me. I couldn't listen anymore. I took my things and left the house that same day. Now I'm in a hotel trying to process what just happened. Valeria, with everything she did, was just another victim in this twisted game of manipulation that Sophia had created. She too had been used. And although I don't justify her actions, it seems she was reacting to a toxic environment that her own mother had created. Today I filed for divorce. There is nothing that can save this marriage after what I discovered. I thought the worst betrayal came from Valeria, but it turns out that all along, my true enemy had been closer than I imagined.